The flashing blue and red lights painted the street in stark, unsettling hues. 22-year-old Kwame sat handcuffed in the back of the police car, the weight of the accusation heavier than the metal biting into his wrists. Racism, a bitter seed sown in the heart of a misunderstanding, had blossomed into this terrifying reality. Just hours before, laughter and shared drinks with Sarah, a new acquaintance, had filled the air. Now, only the gnawing fear of the unknown remained. Sarah, a year younger than Kwame, woke with a jolt. The unfamiliar surroundings, the hazy remnants of the previous night, and the chilling absence of her clothes sent a wave of panic crashing over her. Beside her, Kwame slept soundly, equally unclothed. A horrifying narrative, fueled by fear and a distorted memory, began to take shape in her mind. A narrative that would have devastating consequences. Their paths had crossed at a local bar, a casual Friday night escape from the pressures of early adulthood. Kwame, a budding architect with dreams as tall as the skyscrapers he sketched, found Sarah's vibrant energy infectious. Sarah, navigating the uncertainties of her first job after university, was drawn to Kwame's easygoing charm. Drinks flowed, conversations deepened, a connection sparked. The gentle sway of their intertwined steps marked their progress along the dimly lit street. The remnants of laughter still echoed softly between them, a comfortable cadence against the backdrop of the city's late-night hum. Streetlights cast elongated shadows that danced and merged, mirroring the blurring edges of their slightly inebriated states. Kwame, despite the pleasant buzz that warmed his veins, felt a distinct sense of responsibility for Sarah. Her occasional stumble, her softer tone as she recounted a recent work challenge, triggered a protective instinct within him. He listened attentively, offering murmured words of encouragement, his hand occasionally resting lightly on her arm for a fleeting moment of reassurance. He spoke of his own aspirations, the intricate details of a building design that occupied his thoughts, his voice imbued with a quiet passion. Sarah, in turn, shared anecdotes about her family, her voice laced with both affection and a hint of the anxieties that often accompany navigating the complexities of familial bonds. The air crackled with a nascent connection, an unspoken understanding that transcended the casual nature of their initial encounter. As they approached her building, a sense of ease settled between them. Kwame meticulously guided her up the few steps to her door, his focus unwavering on ensuring her safe arrival. He fumbled slightly with the keys she handed him, the metal cool against his fingertips. The simple act of unlocking her door felt significant, a culmination of their shared evening. He watched as she stepped inside, a fleeting silhouette against the warm glow emanating from her apartment. His intention was purely to see her safely home, a natural extension of the camaraderie they had shared. There was no ulterior motive, no hidden agenda, only the simple desire to be a decent human being. He offered a warm smile and a casual farewell, the image of her slightly tousled hair and grateful expression etching itself in his memory. Turning to leave, he felt a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from a simple act of kindness. The cool night air sobered him slightly as he began his walk home, the echoes of their conversation still lingering in his mind. He replayed certain phrases, certain shared moments of laughter, a sense of pleasant connection lingering in his chest. The thought of seeing her again crossed his mind, a casual inclination towards further exploration of this unexpected connection. He had no premonition of the devastating turn their lives were about to take, no inkling of the horrifying misinterpretation that would soon shatter the fragile peace of this ordinary night. The memory of guiding her to her door, a simple act of courtesy, would soon be twisted and contorted into a damning piece of a false narrative, a stark reminder of how easily good intentions can be tragically misconstrued. The weight of that future misunderstanding was an invisible burden he carried into the night, unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. The gentle camaraderie of their walk, the shared laughter, the burgeoning sense of connection, all of it would soon be overshadowed by the crushing weight of accusation and doubt. He continued his walk, the sounds of the city fading into a distant hum, his thoughts drifting towards the possibilities of this new acquaintance, completely oblivious to the impending nightmare that awaited them both. The simple act of ensuring her safety, a gesture born of respect and human decency, would soon become the focal point of a devastating misunderstanding, a cruel irony that neither of them could have possibly foreseen in the quiet intimacy of that late-night walk. The memory of her grateful smile as she stepped inside her apartment would soon be replaced by the haunting image of her tear-streaked face, her voice filled with fear and accusation. The seeds of a tragic misunderstanding had been sown in the fertile ground of that innocent evening, and the harvest would be bitter indeed. The harsh morning light sliced through the thin curtains, assaulting Sarah's eyes and dragging her from a fitful, dream-laden slumber. A disoriented haze clung to her mind, the remnants of the previous night's alcohol-fueled escapade, a jumbled mess of fragmented images and disjointed conversations. A dull throbbing pulsed behind her temples, a physical manifestation of the mental fog that enveloped her. As her awareness sharpened, a cold dread began to seep into her consciousness. The unfamiliar texture of the sheets beneath her, the strange scent of the room, the unsettling silence, each sensory detail contributed to a growing sense of unease. She shifted slightly, a languid movement that sent a jolt of icy terror through her veins. The stark reality of her nakedness slammed into her with brutal force, a visceral shock that stole her breath. A frantic inventory of her surroundings confirmed her worst fears. Her clothes were nowhere in sight. Panic clawed at her throat, a silent scream trapped within her chest. Her eyes darted around the room, desperately seeking an explanation, a rational reason for this horrifying predicament. Then, she saw him. Kwame lay beside her, his breathing deep and even, equally devoid of clothing. The sight sent a wave of nausea churning in her stomach, the fragmented memories of the previous night coalescing into a terrifying, distorted narrative. The shared drinks, the laughter, the walk home, all of it now seemed tainted, viewed through the prism of her current, vulnerable state. A horrifying certainty began to take root in her mind, a conviction fueled by fear, vulnerability, and the stark visual evidence before her. The gentlemanly demeanor Kwame had displayed the previous night now seemed like a cruel deception, a mask that had slipped away in the darkness. The protective instinct she had briefly sensed in him now morphed into something sinister, a predatory guise. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and violation. She scrambled out of bed, her limbs trembling uncontrollably, a desperate need to put distance between herself and the sleeping figure beside her. The cold air against her bare skin sent shivers down her spine, a physical manifestation of the emotional chill that gripped her. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision as she frantically searched for her clothes, her fingers fumbling with unfamiliar objects in her panicked state. The silence of the apartment seemed to amplify the chaos within her mind, the terrifying narrative solidifying with each passing moment. The weight of her vulnerability pressed down on her, suffocating her with fear and a profound sense of betrayal. The image of Kwame sleeping peacefully beside her became etched in her mind, a stark and horrifying tableau that fueled her growing conviction. The line between hazy memory and perceived reality blurred, her fear painting a grim picture of the night's events. The thought of what might have happened, the violation she felt so acutely, propelled her towards the phone, her hand shaking violently as she dialed the emergency number. Each ring of the phone amplified her distress, a desperate plea for help in the face of her overwhelming fear. Her voice trembled as she spoke to the dispatcher, the words tumbling out in a rush of panic and fragmented recollection. The narrative she presented was raw, emotional, and colored by the stark reality of her nakedness and the presence of a similarly unclothed stranger in her bed. The seed of racial bias, an unfortunate undercurrent in societal perceptions, subtly influenced her initial recounting, amplifying her sense of vulnerability and solidifying her conviction of wrongdoing. The fear that gripped her was palpable, a visceral reaction to a situation that seemed to confirm her worst anxieties. As she recounted the hazy details of the previous night, the narrative hardened in her mind, the initial uncertainty replaced by a firm belief in her own interpretation of events. The arrival of the police felt both like a relief and a terrifying confirmation of her fears. The flashing lights outside her window cast an ominous glow on her small apartment, transforming her sanctuary into a crime scene. The weight of her accusation, fueled by fear and a distorted recollection, would soon set in motion a chain of events that would have devastating consequences for both her and the sleeping figure in her bed. The fragile peace of the morning had been shattered, replaced by the harsh reality of suspicion, accusation, and the enduring complexities of human perception. Detective Miller stepped into Sarah's apartment, his senses immediately taking in the scene. The air was thick with a palpable tension, a residue of fear and distress that hung heavy in the small space. Sarah sat huddled on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes red and swollen, her body still trembling despite the relative warmth of the room. Her roommate stood beside her, her expression a mixture of concern and protective anger. Miller's gaze swept over the disheveled state of the bedroom, the tangled sheets on the bed, the scattered clothing on the floor, silent witnesses to the night's ambiguous events. He approached Sarah with a calm and measured demeanor, his voice low and reassuring. He introduced himself, his words carefully chosen to create a sense of safety and trust. He listened intently as Sarah recounted her version of the night, his gaze unwavering, his expression neutral. He noted the inconsistencies in her narrative, the gaps in her memory, the raw emotion that colored her account. He recognized the signs of trauma, a heightened state of anxiety that often distorts perception. He asked clarifying questions, gently probing for details, seeking to piece together the fragmented puzzle of the previous evening. He paid close attention not only to what she said but also to what she omitted, to the subtle shifts in her body language, the flicker of doubt that occasionally crossed her tear-filled eyes. He knew that first accounts were often unreliable, filtered through the lens of emotion and fear. His years on the force had taught him the complexities of human memory, the way trauma could both sharpen and distort recollections. He understood the societal biases that could influence perception, the way preconceived notions could color interpretations of ambiguous situations. He made a mental note of the lack of obvious signs of forced entry, the absence of any physical evidence of a struggle. He observed the remnants of empty glasses on the coffee table, the lingering scent of alcohol in the air, indicators of a night where judgment might have been clouded. He spoke to Sarah's roommate, gathering another perspective on the evening's events, seeking to corroborate or contradict Sarah's account. He understood the delicate nature of the situation, the potential for misinterpretation, the devastating consequences of a rush to judgment. His priority was to uncover the truth, to navigate the complexities of conflicting narratives with diligence and impartiality. He knew that the truth often lay buried beneath layers of emotion, fear, and subjective experience. He assured Sarah that he would conduct a thorough investigation, that he would listen to all sides of the story before drawing any conclusions. His calm and professional demeanor offered a small measure of reassurance in the midst of her distress, a beacon of objectivity in a situation fraught with emotion. He knew that the next step was crucial, that the interview with Kwame would shed further light on the events of the night, potentially confirming or contradicting Sarah's account. He carried the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that his investigation would have a profound impact on the lives of both individuals involved. His commitment to seeking the truth, to upholding justice, guided his every word and action as he began to unravel the tangled threads of this deeply troubling situation. The first rays of sunlight filtering through the unfamiliar curtains stirred Kwame from his deep slumber. A heavy fog clung to his mind, the lingering effects of the alcohol blurring the edges of his memory. He stretched languidly, his limbs heavy and slightly stiff. As his consciousness gradually returned, a wave of disorientation washed over him. He blinked, trying to orient himself in the unfamiliar surroundings. The floral wallpaper, the delicate trinkets on the bedside table, none of it registered as his own. Then, the stark realization hit him, he was naked. A jolt of confusion shot through him, instantly dispelling the remaining vestiges of sleep. He sat up abruptly, his heart pounding in his chest, his eyes scanning the room with a growing sense of unease. He vaguely recalled walking Sarah home, the easy flow of their conversation, the gentlemanly act of seeing her safely inside. But the subsequent hours remained a hazy void, a disconcerting blank space in his memory. He ran a hand through his tousled hair, his mind racing, desperately trying to piece together the missing fragments of the night. The weight of the situation began to dawn on him as he noticed Sarah's absence from the bed. A knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. Where was she and why were they both unclothed? The innocent intentions of the previous evening now seemed shrouded in a sinister ambiguity. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his bare feet touching the cool wooden floor. A sense of vulnerability washed over him, a feeling of being exposed and inexplicably compromised. He stood up, his gaze sweeping over the room, searching for any clue, any explanation for their current predicament. His eyes landed on a discarded pile of clothing in the corner, a tangled heap that included both his and Sarah's garments. The sight offered no comfort, only deepening the mystery and fueling his growing unease. The potential for misinterpretation, the horrifying implications of their undressed state, began to crystallize in his mind. He thought of Sarah, her initial warmth and friendliness now overshadowed by a creeping sense of dread. What was she thinking? What did she remember? The silence of the apartment felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken possibilities, any one of them potentially devastating. He moved towards the living room, his senses on high alert, a growing sense of foreboding weighing heavily on his shoulders. The sight that greeted him sent a chill down his spine. Sarah was not there. The front door stood slightly ajar, a silent testament to her hurried departure. A profound sense of unease settled over him, a premonition of something terribly wrong. He felt a surge of panic, a primal fear of the unknown. He had acted with nothing but honorable intentions, yet the situation in which he found himself was deeply compromising, dangerously open to misinterpretation. The weight of societal biases, the inherent vulnerability of his position as a young black man in such a scenario, pressed down on him. He knew how easily his actions could be misconstrued, how quickly assumptions could harden into accusations. The innocent connection he had felt with Sarah the previous night now seemed fragile, threatened by the ambiguous circumstances of their morning after. He felt a desperate need to understand what had happened, to unravel the mystery of their shared nudity and Sarah's sudden departure. He knew, with a growing certainty, that this was more than just an awkward morning after. Something was terribly wrong, and he was inexplicably caught in the middle of it. The carefree spirit of the previous evening had vanished, replaced by a gnawing anxiety and the chilling premonition of impending disaster. The fluorescent lights of the interrogation room hummed with a sterile indifference, casting harsh shadows that danced across Kwame's increasingly anxious face. The initial shock of the arrest had given way to a simmering anger, a burning sense of injustice that threatened to boil over. He sat rigidly in the uncomfortable metal chair, his handcuffed wrists resting heavily on the cold steel table. Detective Miller sat opposite him, his gaze steady and probing, his notepad open, waiting. Kwame's voice, initially trembling with disbelief, gained strength as he recounted the events of the previous night. He spoke of the casual encounter at the bar, the shared laughter, the easy camaraderie that had blossomed between him and Sarah. He emphasized his genuine admiration for her vibrant spirit, the respectful nature of their interactions. He detailed their walk back to her apartment, his unwavering focus on ensuring her safety, the simple act of seeing her to her door. He vehemently denied any coercive behavior, any intention of causing her harm or distress. The accusation of rape felt like a physical blow, a brutal assault on his character, his integrity, his very sense of self. He spoke of waking up in her bed, the wave of confusion that had washed over him, the unsettling discovery of their shared nakedness. He described his own disorientation, his immediate concern for Sarah, his bewilderment at the situation. He struggled to articulate the missing hours, the hazy void in his memory that now loomed large and threatening. He reiterated his gentlemanly intentions, his protective instincts towards Sarah, the complete absence of any malicious intent. The weight of the accusation pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. He felt the sting of prejudice, the unspoken assumptions that might be coloring the detective's perception. He knew the statistics, the disproportionate number of young black men wrongly accused, the fear of becoming another statistic, another victim of racial bias within the justice system. Nodded him. He watched Detective Miller's impassive expression, searching for any sign of understanding, any flicker of doubt in the detective's eyes. He pleaded his innocence, his voice filled with a raw sincerity, a desperate attempt to convey the truth of his actions and intentions. The sterile environment of the interrogation room felt suffocating, amplifying his sense of isolation and vulnerability. He felt trapped, caught in a nightmare of misinterpretation and accusation. The weight of the handcuffs served as a constant, physical reminder of his predicament, the tangible manifestation of the devastating turn their lives had taken. He knew that his future, his reputation, everything he had worked for hung precariously in the balance, dependent on his ability to convince the stranger of his innocence. The injustice of the situation burned within him, a fierce and righteous anger battling against the gnawing fear of the unknown. He spoke with conviction, his voice rising and falling with the intensity of his emotions, laying bare his truth in the hope that it would be heard, that it would be believed. The silence that followed his account felt heavy, charged with unspoken questions and lingering doubts. He waited, his breath held captive in his chest, for Detective Miller's response, for any indication of how his words had been received. For any glimmer of hope in the suffocating darkness of his predicament. Detective Miller's investigation proceeded with a meticulous and methodical approach, each step carefully considered, each piece of information meticulously documented. He began by revisiting the bar where Kwame and Sarah had first met, interviewing the bartender and other patrons who might have witnessed their interactions. He sought to establish the timeline of their evening, the amount of alcohol consumed by each of them, and the general nature of their demeanor and interactions. He reviewed the bar's security footage, searching for visual confirmation of their interactions, looking for any subtle cues or interactions that might shed light on the dynamic between them. He spoke to Sarah's roommate again, delving deeper into Sarah's personality, her recent emotional state, and any relevant past experiences that might have influenced her interpretation of events. He sought to understand Sarah's baseline behavior, her tendencies, and any potential vulnerabilities that might have contributed to her current distress. He meticulously documented the physical evidence in Sarah's apartment, noting the lack of any signs of forced entry or struggle. He examined the discarded clothing, searching for any physical evidence that might support or contradict Sarah's account. He arranged for forensic tests to be conducted, seeking objective data to corroborate the subjective narratives. He delved into Kwame's background, interviewing his friends, family, and colleagues, seeking to build a comprehensive picture of his character and reputation. He spoke to David and Aisha, Kwame's steadfast friends, who vehemently defended his integrity and expressed their unwavering belief in his innocence. Their accounts painted a picture of a kind, respectful, and honorable young man, a stark contrast to the accusations leveled against him. Detective Miller recognized the complexities of the case, the absence of clear-cut evidence, the reliance on subjective interpretations of a night clouded by alcohol and miscommunication. He understood the potential for both genuine trauma and misconstrued intentions. He was acutely aware of the racial dynamics at play, the potential for unconscious bias to influence perceptions and judgments. He approached the investigation with a commitment to impartiality, determined to uncover the truth, regardless of societal pressures or preconceived notions. He meticulously pieced together the timeline of events, cross-referencing the various accounts, searching for inconsistencies and points of convergence. He analyzed the emotional undercurrents of each interview, recognizing the powerful influence of fear, vulnerability, and the desire for understanding. He spent hours reviewing his notes, poring over the details, seeking to construct a coherent narrative that accounted for all the available information. He resisted the urge to jump to conclusions, allowing the evidence to guide his investigation, rather than allowing his own biases or assumptions to shape his understanding. The process was slow and painstaking, a meticulous sifting through layers of perception and emotion. Detective Miller knew that the truth in such cases was often elusive, hidden beneath layers of miscommunication and subjective experience. His commitment to thoroughness and objectivity remained unwavering, driven by a deep sense of responsibility to both Sarah and Kwame, and a profound understanding of the potentially devastating consequences of a miscarriage of justice. The sterile white walls of her apartment seemed to close in on Sarah, amplifying the turmoil within her. The initial certainty that had propelled her to call the police began to erode, replaced by a gnawing unease, a persistent whisper of doubt that she tried desperately to silence. Sleep offered little respite, her nights haunted by fragmented images of the previous evening, the laughter, the shared confidences, Kwame's gentle demeanor. These memories now clashed violently with the stark reality of waking up naked beside him, creating a dissonant chord in her mind. She replayed their conversations, searching for any hint of malice, any flicker of a predatory glint in his eyes. But all she could recall was a genuine warmth, a shared connection that had felt innocent and uncomplicated at the time. The protective instinct she had briefly sensed in him during their walk home now resurfaced in her memory, a fleeting image of his hand gently guiding her across a curb, his concern for her well-being seeming genuine. The more she replayed the events, the more the sharp edges of her initial conviction began to soften, replaced by a confusing haze of uncertainty. The stark reality of their undressed state remained a potent trigger for her fear, yet the narrative she had constructed around it began to feel increasingly fragile, undermined by these conflicting recollections. She found herself questioning her own memory, wondering if the alcohol, her own vulnerability, and perhaps even subconscious biases had colored her perception. The unwavering support of her roommate, initially a source of comfort, now felt like a subtle pressure, reinforcing a narrative that she herself was no longer entirely sure of. She avoided looking at herself in the mirror, the reflection serving as a stark reminder of her vulnerability, the source of her initial terror. Yet, the image of Kwame's sleeping face also haunted her, an image that now evoked not only fear but also a flicker of confusion, a sense that perhaps things were not as clear-cut as she had initially believed. The weight of her accusation began to press down on her, a heavy burden of responsibility and the terrifying possibility that she might have made a terrible mistake. The thought of the devastating consequences for Kwame, the potential destruction of his life and reputation, began to fill her with a growing sense of dread. She found herself oscillating between her initial fear and a dawning realization that her perception might have been skewed by her own vulnerability and societal biases. The certainty she had felt in the immediate aftermath began to crumble under the weight of her increasingly conflicted memories and a growing awareness of the complexities of human interaction. The silence of her apartment was no longer a sanctuary but an echo chamber of her doubts, amplifying the internal battle raging within her. The path forward felt uncertain, fraught with the potential for further pain and the terrifying possibility of irreparable damage. The news of Kwame's arrest sent shockwaves through his close-knit circle of friends. David and Aisha, his closest confidants since their university days, reacted with immediate and vehement disbelief. They knew Kwame, his inherent kindness, his unwavering respect for others, his gentle nature. The accusation of rape felt utterly alien to the man they knew and loved, a grotesque distortion of his character. They rallied around him immediately, their support unwavering and vocal. They spent hours on the phone, their voices filled with outrage and concern, offering words of encouragement and practical assistance. They contacted a lawyer, their determination fueled by a fierce loyalty and a deep-seated belief in Kwame's innocence. They spoke to mutual friends, sharing their disbelief and urging them to offer their support. Aisha, ever the pragmatist, began meticulously documenting Kwame's character, gathering testimonials from professors, colleagues, and acquaintances, building a solid foundation of evidence to counter the damaging accusations. David, his usually jovial demeanor replaced by a steely resolve, became Kwame's fierce advocate, challenging the narrative being presented and speaking out against the rush to judgment. They both recognized the insidious role that racial prejudice could play in such situations, the way in which societal biases could quickly paint Kwame as guilty in the eyes of some, even before the facts were fully established. They feared the court of public opinion, the swift and often unforgiving judgment that could be passed based on stereotypes and assumptions. Their unwavering support became a lifeline for Kwame, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness of his predicament. Their belief in him served as a powerful antidote to the crushing weight of the accusations and the isolation of his confinement. They visited him regularly, their presence a tangible reminder that he was not alone in this fight. They listened patiently as he recounted his version of events, their belief unwavering, their empathy palpable. Their anger at the injustice of the situation fueled their determination to fight for him, to ensure that the truth, however complex and nuanced, would ultimately prevail. They understood the gravity of the situation, the potential consequences for Kwame's future, and they vowed to do everything in their power to clear his name. Their friendship became a shield against the storm of accusations, a testament to the enduring power of loyalty and the unwavering belief in the inherent goodness of a friend. They navigated the complexities of the legal system alongside him, offering emotional support and practical assistance, their presence a constant source of strength and reassurance in the face of overwhelming adversity. The courtroom buzzed with a tense, almost palpable energy as the legal proceedings commenced. Kwame sat beside his lawyer, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed straight ahead, trying to project an outward calm that belied the turmoil churning within him. His lawyer, a seasoned professional with a reputation for meticulous preparation and unwavering advocacy, presented their case with methodical precision. She meticulously laid out the timeline of events, highlighting the consensual interactions between Kwame and Sarah at the bar, emphasizing the absence of any signs of coercion or force during their time together. She presented the security footage from the bar, showcasing their relaxed demeanor and friendly interactions, subtly challenging the narrative of a predatory aggressor. She drew attention to the lack of forced entry into Sarah's apartment, the absence of any physical evidence of a struggle, the inconsistencies in Sarah's initial account to the police. She skillfully cross-examined the prosecution's witnesses, gently probing for inconsistencies and highlighting the subjective nature of Sarah's interpretation of events. She presented the character testimonials gathered by Aisha, painting a portrait of Kwame as a respectful, kind, and honorable young man, a stark contrast to the accusations leveled against him. She argued that the situation was a tragic misunderstanding, a consequence of alcohol-impaired judgment and the highly charged emotional state of Sarah upon waking up in an unfamiliar situation. She addressed the sensitive issue of racial bias, subtly suggesting that unconscious prejudices might have played a role in the initial interpretation of events, urging the jury to consider the evidence objectively, free from any preconceived notions. She emphasized the lack of concrete evidence to support the serious charges against Kwame, highlighting the reliance on Sarah's subjective interpretation of ambiguous circumstances. The courtroom became a stage for the unfolding drama of conflicting narratives, a battleground where truth and perception collided. Kwame watched the proceedings with a mixture of hope and trepidation, his future hanging precariously on the words and arguments presented by his lawyer and the interpretation of those words by the jury. The weight of the accusation, the potential for a life irrevocably altered, hung heavy in the air. Each piece of evidence presented, each question asked, each objection raised, added another layer of complexity to the already fraught situation. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, a silent testament to the high stakes involved, the profound impact the verdict would have on the lives of everyone involved. Kwame's lawyer's calm and reasoned arguments stood in stark contrast to the raw emotion that had characterized Sarah's initial account, creating a compelling counter-narrative that challenged the prosecution's case and sowed seeds of doubt in the minds of the jury. The legal dance unfolded with deliberate precision, each step carefully choreographed, each argument strategically placed, all aimed at unraveling the truth from the tangled web of perception and accusation. Sitting in the witness stand, under the intense scrutiny of the courtroom, Sarah felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The initial certainty that had fueled her accusations now felt fragile, eroded by the slow, deliberate presentation of evidence and the persistent gnawing of her own doubts. The memories of the previous night, once sharp and clear in her mind, now seemed hazy and unreliable, tainted by the lingering effects of alcohol and the powerful influence of her initial fear. The prosecutor's questions, initially reinforcing her conviction, now felt like a relentless probing, forcing her to confront the inconsistencies in her own recollection. Kwame's lawyer's gentle yet persistent cross-examination chipped away at her certainty, highlighting the gaps in her memory, the absence of any definitive proof of coercion, the possibility of a different interpretation of events. The image of Kwame's calm and respectful demeanor at the bar, once dismissed as a deceptive facade, now resurfaced with a disquieting clarity. The fleeting moments of connection, the shared laughter, his genuine concern for her well-being during their walk home, these memories now carried a weight that she could no longer ignore. The stark reality of their nakedness upon waking still triggered a visceral sense of violation, yet the certainty that Kwame was the perpetrator began to waver. The possibility that the situation was a tragic misunderstanding, a consequence of their intoxicated state and her own panicked reaction, began to take root in her mind, a terrifying alternative to the narrative she had initially embraced. The weight of her accusation, the potential for irreversible damage to Kwame's life, pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. The faces of Kwame's friends and family in the courtroom, their expressions a mixture of pain and unwavering belief in his innocence, served as a constant reminder of the human cost of her accusation. The societal implications of the case, the undercurrent of racial bias that had been subtly introduced, also weighed heavily on her conscience. The realization that her fear, compounded by societal prejudices, might have led to a grave injustice filled her with a profound sense of unease and a growing moral conflict. The courtroom, once a place where she sought justice, now felt like a stage for her own internal struggle, a battle between her initial fear and a dawning awareness of the complexities of the situation. Her testimony became hesitant, her answers less certain, her voice tinged with a growing doubt. The unwavering conviction she had initially felt began to crumble under the weight of her own conflicting memories and the undeniable possibility that she might have been wrong. The process of confronting her own potential misinterpretation, the possibility that her fear had led her to accuse an innocent man, was a painful and deeply unsettling experience, forcing her to confront not only the events of that night but also her own biases and vulnerabilities. The weight of her potential mistake hung heavy in the air, a silent testament to the devastating consequences of assumptions and the fragile nature of truth. The silence in the courtroom was thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket of anticipation that pressed down on everyone present. The jury, their faces etched with the gravity of their responsibility, filed back into the jury box. Every rustle of paper, every hushed cough, seemed amplified in the charged atmosphere. Kwame sat ramrod straight beside his lawyer, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his gaze fixed on the jury foreman. Sarah sat across the room, her eyes darting nervously between Kwame and the jury, her face pale and drawn, the internal conflict of the past days etched in her features. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, a culmination of days of testimony, evidence, and emotional turmoil. The verdict, when it finally came, hung in the air like a fragile thread, capable of unraveling lives in an instant. The foreman's voice, when he finally spoke, was clear and steady, yet each word seemed to carry the weight of immense consequence. The pronouncement of guilt or innocence would not only determine Kwame's immediate future but would also serve as a stark commentary on the complexities of human interaction, the insidious nature of prejudice, and the devastating impact of assumptions. The courtroom held its collective breath, a microcosm of a society grappling with its own biases and the delicate balance between justice and misjudgment. The expressions on the faces of Kwame's friends and family were a mixture of hope and fear, their anticipation palpable. Sarah's roommate sat beside her, her hand resting gently on Sarah's arm, offering silent support in the face of the impending judgment. Detective Miller observed the scene with a detached professionalism, his expression unreadable, yet the weight of the case, the delicate balance between conflicting narratives, was evident in the lines around his eyes. The verdict, whatever it might be, would leave an indelible mark on the lives of Kwame and Sarah, a permanent scar tissue of this deeply troubling ordeal. It would either affirm the accusations, validating Sarah's initial fear and potentially altering the course of Kwame's life forever, or it would expose the fragility of perception and the devastating consequences of a rush to judgment, leaving Sarah to grapple with the potential implications of her accusations. The air crackled with unspoken anxieties, the weight of what was at stake pressing down on everyone present. The simple words of the verdict would shatter the silence, releasing the pent-up tension and forever altering the trajectory of the lives caught in its web. Regardless of the verdict echoed through the courtroom that day, the lives of Kwame and Sarah were irrevocably fractured, forever marked by the events that had transpired. The incident served as a brutal and stark reminder of the intricate and often treacherous complexities of human interaction, where intentions can be misconstrued, perceptions can be distorted, and the consequences can be devastatingly real. The insidious nature of prejudice, the unconscious biases that can subtly shape our interpretations and judgments, were laid bare for all to see. The fragile foundation of trust between individuals, and within the broader societal fabric, was shaken, revealing the ease with which misunderstandings can escalate into life-altering accusations. For Kwame, even an acquittal would not erase the stain of the accusation, the experience of being suspected and detained, the fear of a future unjustly stolen. The shadow of doubt might linger, coloring future interactions and opportunities. The emotional scars of the ordeal, the anger and the sense of injustice, would likely remain, a constant reminder of the vulnerability he had experienced. For Sarah, a guilty verdict against Kwame might offer a sense of validation, but it would not erase the internal conflict she had grappled with, the lingering doubts about her own recollections. A not guilty verdict, however, would force her to confront the terrifying possibility that her fear and assumptions had led to a grave injustice, a burden of guilt and responsibility that could be equally. The journey towards understanding and reconciliation, if such a path even existed, would be long and arduous, fraught with emotional landmines and the enduring pain of what had transpired. The incident served as a painful lesson in the importance of empathy, of seeking to understand perspectives beyond our own, of the devastating consequences of allowing fear and prejudice to dictate our perceptions. The fragile nature of truth, the way it can be obscured by emotion and bias, was starkly illuminated. The potential for irreparable damage to individuals and communities, when trust erodes and assumptions take root, became chillingly apparent. The long and difficult process of rebuilding trust, of fostering understanding across divides, would require courage, empathy, and a willingness to confront the uncomfortable truths about human nature and societal biases. The echoes of this dramatic and deeply personal conflict would likely reverberate long after the courtroom doors closed, a testament to the enduring fragility of human connection and the profound and lasting impact of our actions and assumptions on the lives of others.